They say the woods are quiet at night, but they're wrong. The silence, there isn't peace. It's something waiting, listening, pretending to be asleep. Before I tell you what happened in those cabins, do yourself a favor, subscribe, hit the bell, and stay till the end. Because once you hear what really happened out there, you'll never look at the woods the same way again. The first time I stayed in a remote cabin, I thought I was chasing peace. I've been dealing with burnout from work, city noise, deadlines, constant stress. So when a friend told me about a cheap rental up in northern Maine, deep in the woods near a frozen lake, I booked it instantly. The drive took hours, winding through endless pine forests. My GPS lost signal long before I arrived, and by the time I reached the cabin, dusk had already settled in. The place looked old but sturdy. Dark logs, a tin roof, and a tiny front porch overlooking miles of nothing. The owner, a quiet old man named Harold, met me there. His truck idled behind him as he handed me the keys. "Just remember," he said, his eyes shifting toward the tree line. "If you're knocking after midnight, don't open the door. Not for anything." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. He didn't laugh back. When his headlights disappeared down the trail, I was alone. The air felt heavier somehow. I tried to shake it off, unpacked my things, made some coffee, and lit a fire in the old stone fireplace. For a while, it was perfect. The crackle of flames, the wind outside brushing through the trees. But around 1 a.m., I woke up. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the room. It took me a moment to realize what had woken me, a faint sound from outside. At first, I thought it was the wind, until I heard it again. Knock. 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 3 slow, deliberate taps on the wooden door. I froze. My first thought was maybe Harold had come back, or someone got lost. But who the hell would drive this deep into the woods at this hour? I got up, my bare feet brushing the cold floorboards, and went to the door. The cabin didn't have a peephole, so I peeked through the small front window beside it. Nothing. Just the trees, standing still in the dark. Then, another knock. Louder, this time. "Primera, va queda huay." My mind replayed Harold's words. "Don't open the door after midnight." For the next few minutes, I just stood there, staring at the handle. The knocking stopped, but I could hear soft, crunching sounds like footsteps circling the cabin. My pulse was hammering in my throat. I reached for my phone to call someone. No signal. Of course. Then came the whisper. At first, it sounded like the wind again, until I realized it was saying something. A low, breathy murmur from the other side of the door. "Let me in, please." It was a woman's voice, weak, trembling, almost sobbing. I wanted to open the door. Primera Relay did, but something in my gut screamed not to. The voice sounded wrong, like it wasn't coming from a person standing outside, but from something trying to sound like one. "Please," it said again, closer this time. "It's so cold." My hands were shaking. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace and took a step toward the door. But before I could move closer, the voice changed. It stopped sounding like a woman. It sounded like me. "Please, let me in." It repeated, in my own voice. Every hair on my body stood up. I backed away slowly, staring at the door as the whispering grew frantic. Angry, dozens of overlapping voices now, all begging, pleading, mimicking tones I couldn't even describe. And then, silence. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with the fire poker in hand, watching the door until dawn. When morning came, I finally opened it. Nothing. No footprints in the snow. No sign anyone had been there. But something was off. Near the doorframe, I noticed tiny scratches. Long, thin, almost like fingernail marks, trailing from the handle down to the floor. I packed my stuff and left before nightfall. Harold wasn't there when I dropped the key off. But I left a note. "You were right. I didn't open it." That should have been the end of my encounters with cabins in the woods. But somehow, I kept finding my way back to them. Like something in those forests had taken an interest in me. Because a few months later, it happened again. It was early summer this time. My girlfriend Sarah and I had rented a lakeside cabin in upstate New York. This one was more modern. Glass windows, a small dock, even solar power. She'd found it online and thought it would be romantic. At first, we spent the day kayaking, barbecuing, and drinking wine on the porch as the sun dipped below the trees. Everything felt perfect until that first night. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to a noise outside. Not knocking this time, more like soft, dragging across the deck. I tried to ignore it, but Sarah stood beside me. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded. We both listened. There it was again, a slow scrape, then silence. I got up, pulled on a sweatshirt, and stepped carefully toward the sliding glass door. The porch light was off, so I could barely see beyond the reflection of our room in the glass. "Probably an animal," I said, more to convince myself than her. But something about the sound, steady, rhythmic, almost deliberate, didn't feel like an animal at all. Sarah joined me by the door, clutching my arm. I slid it open just a crack. The night air poured in, cold and heavy. The forest was dead silent, and then something moved. A faint shuffle near the edge of the porch, followed by a hand. Pale, human-looking fingers gripping the wooden railing. Saragaspid and I slammed the door shut so hard the glass rattled. "What was that?" she whispered, backing away. I didn't know, but I remembered that first cabin, and the sound of knocking, and the voice that had used mine. We turned off all the lights and watched through the window as the shadows outside seemed to shift. At one point, I swear I saw a face, not clear. Just two glints of reflection like eyes watching us from the dark. That's when I realized. Whatever it was, it hadn't stayed in Maine. It had followed me. The second cabin was supposed to be different. Safer. I told myself what happened in Maine was just sleep deprivation and isolation playing tricks on me. But deep down, I already knew better. After that night in upstate New York, Sarah refused to stay another day. We packed our things before sunrise, not speaking much on the drive home. She didn't want to talk about what she saw, or what we thought we saw. By the time we reached the highway, she looked at me and said quietly, "Don't ever take me to the woods again." We broke up 2 weeks later. She said she couldn't sleep anymore. Said she'd wake up to knocking sounds that weren't there. I moved to a new apartment in the city. Told myself I was done with remote cabins. But 3 months later, work sent me to Washington State for a project. The company booked me a week-long stay in a secluded woodland retreat, meant for focus and privacy. When I saw the photos online, tall trees, a quiet creek nearby, my stomach dropped. I almost canceled. Almost. The moment I arrived, I knew something was wrong. The air felt heavy, like it carried a charge. The cabin itself was newer, built of dark cedar, large windows, minimal furniture. There was even a small security camera above the porch light. But despite all that, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. The first 2 days were quiet. I worked during the day, cooked at night, kept to myself. It was on the third night that the unease came creeping back. It started with the power flickering. I thought maybe it was just a storm rolling in. But when I looked outside, the sky was perfectly clear. No wind, no rain, nothing. Hustad deep, endless black between the trees. I checked the breaker, all fine. When I came back inside, I noticed something odd on the front window. A faint smear, like a handprint. I wiped it off and went back to work, trying to ignore the rising tightness in my chest. But the quiet was unbearable. Every tiny creak of the cabin felt magnified. Floorboards, wood expanding, the faint groan of the roof, and underneath all of it, a new sound began. It was soft, faint, almost like humming. I paused the video I was editing on my laptop and listened. The humming continued low, tuneless, but definitely human. It was coming from outside. I crept toward the window again, every step careful. The humming stopped. Then, a light knock echoed from the back door. My throat went dry. The back door opened toward the forest, just a few yards from the tree line. Slowly, I turned the lights off and stood in the dark, staring toward that sound. Knock. 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 It was soft, almost polite. Then, a whisper. Open it. My blood turned to ice. The voice was familiar. I didn't know how at first until I realized it was Sarah's. I hadn't spoken to her since we split, and I knew she wasn't here. But the voice outside sounded exactly like her. Please, it said. I need to talk to you. I stood there, frozen. Every instinct screamed at me not to move. Note to unswear. Not to even breathe too loudly. The whisper came again, softer now, right against the door. Don't you miss me? Something scraped against the wood. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging across it. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace again and backed away. The scraping continued, then turned into tapping, then silence. I didn't move for what felt like hours. Eventually, exhaustion got the better of me. I collapsed onto the couch and drifted into a restless sleep. When you woke up, the cabin was bathed in morning light. For a second, I almost laughed. It all felt unreal, like a nightmare. But when I checked the back door, I stopped cold. Someone had written something in the dirt just outside, words traced by what looked like fingertips. You left me in the dark. My stomach dropped. I packed my bags immediately, but before leaving, I checked the security footage from the porch camera. Part of me needed to see. The video from the night before showed nothing for hours. Just the porch, the trees, the darkness. Then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., a shadow moved into frame. It was tall, almost human-shaped, but the proportions were wrong. They had tilted too far, the limbs too long, the movements too smooth. It stood by the back door for several minutes, motionless, before leaning closer to the window. Even though the footage had no audio, I swear I could feel it whispering. Then it turned, directly toward the camera. Its face, if you could call it that, was just pale skin stretched over bone. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. And yet, somehow, I knew it was looking at me. The screen flickered, and the video ended. I left that cabin within 10 minutes. On my way back, I called the company that owned it to report what I saw. The receptionist's voice went quiet when I described it. She told me the cabin had been empty for months before my stay, and that the last tenant had filed a similar complaint. She said they heard voices in the night and refused to return. That was it for me. I told myself I'd never step foot near another isolated cabin again. But the thing is, sometimes these places call you back. Sometimes they find you even when you think you've left them behind. It wasn't until the third time, the last time, that I realized what it really wanted. Because the final cabin wasn't one I booked. It was one that found me. I didn't plan on going back into the woods. Not ever. But about 6 months after the incident in Washington, I got an email from a private owner offering me a weekend retreat, free of charge as an apology for my previous unpleasant experience. They didn't specify which company they were from. The message looked professional. The photos showed a newly built cabin in Oregon, surrounded by mountains and open sky. It looked nothing like the others. Right open, safe. Against my better judgment, I went. I told myself I needed closure. Maybe if I went one last time and nothing happened, I could move on. The road there was steep and winding, the forest growing denser the higher I climbed. When I arrived, the air was strangely still. The cabin was exactly like the photos. Clean, modern, untouched, but there was no reception, no Wi-Fi, no sign of another human for miles. A handwritten note sat on the counter. "Welcome back." That's all it said. My chest tightened. I looked around, half expecting someone to jump out, but the cabin was empty. I checked every corner, every closet, even the basement. Nothing. By sunset, I convinced myself it was just some creepy marketing joke, maybe from the rental service. I lit a fire, cooked dinner, and tried to enjoy the quiet. But as night fell, the woods changed. It is hard to explain if you've never been alone that far out. The silence I assent. Peaceful. It's heavy, pressing against you from all sides. Around midnight, I started hearing it again. The knocking. 3 slow taps at the front door. At first, I froze. Then I whispered to myself, "It's just the wind, it's nothing." But then the second knock came. Louder, closer. And a voice followed. Not Sarah's this time. Not mine. But something else. Welcome home. It sounded like it was whispering through the cracks of the wood. I turned off every light, backed into the living room, and stared toward the door. The voice came again, calm and certain. "You came back. You always do." I wanted to run. I really did. But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the floor. Then a second voice joined it. Higher, softer, coming from the back door. "Let us in." The air went ice cold. My breath fogged in front of me, and then came footsteps. Not one pair, but several, circling the cabin. Slow. Dragging. I realized something horrifying then. They weren't outside. They were underneath. The sound was faint at first. Dull thuds against the wooden floor. 10, scrapping, crawling. Something was moving under the house. I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the crawlspace access in the hallway. The hatch was half open. I knelt down, trembling, and shone the light inside. What I saw, I'll never forget. A narrow tunnel stretched out beneath the cabin, carved through the dirt, like something had been digging its way in. And at the end of that tunnel, barely visible in the beam of light, was a face. It wasn't human. The skin was gray, stretched thin like wet paper, the mouth far too wide, the teeth too small and too many. Its eyes, black, empty holes, caught the flashlight just enough to gleam. 10. It smiled. I slammed the hatch shut, grabbed my bag, and bolted for the truck. But when I reached the front door, I stopped dead. The door was already open. Cold air flooded in, and in the doorway stood a figure. It wasn't the gray thing from the crawl space. It was something wearing me. Same height, same build, same clothes. Its face was mine, but wrong to pale. Too smooth, its eyes slightly too wide. It tilted its head like it was studying me. "You shouldn't have come back," it said, in my voice. Every instinct in me screamed to run, so I did out the side door, through the trees, tripping over roots and rocks in the dark. I didn't stop until I saw the faint glow of my truck's taillights. When I looked back, the cabin was completely dark again. Silent. I drove for hours without looking in the rearview mirror, terrified I'd see something sitting in the back seat. When I finally reached town, I went straight to the nearest motel. The woman at the front desk gave me a strange look as I checked in. "You from the Ridge?" she asked. I nodded weakly. Her expression changed. "That place burned down last winter." I froze. "What?" She repeated it. The cabin had burned down months ago. No one had rebuilt it. No one lived up there. I showed her the email confirmation. She looked at it, frowned, and shook her head. "This domain doesn't exist," she said softly. I didn't sleep that night. When I finally opened my laptop to recheck the email, it was gone. Completely vanished from my inbox, like it had never been sent. The next morning, I drove to where the cabin should have been. She was right. There was nothing there. Just a blackened clearing and the faint remains of a foundation, overgrown with moss. But there was something else. Half buried near the ashes, a piece of wood. Charred, cracked, but still faintly visible under the burn marks. 3 knocks, the same pattern, carved deep into the grain. That was the last time I ever went near the woods. But sometimes, late at night, when everything's quiet and still, I swear I still hear it. A soft, familiar rhythm against the walls. Knock! 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 And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear it whisper, in my own voice, "Welcome home." If you made it this far, Thank you for listening. Tell me what you think this thing was. A ghost, a mimic, or something older? Drop your theories in the comments below, hit the like button, and make sure you're subscribed with the bell on, because the next story might be closer to home than you think.